This has been a really exciting opportunity for us. Announced in September 2021, the Professional Practice Fellowship Scheme for Academic and Research Libraries provided fellowships of up to £20,000, 80% of full economic costings, to enable library colleagues to set research agendas and to be active colleagues, to be active participants and leaders in multidisciplinary research. And the scheme was a direct result of the findings from a scoping study undertaken by RLUK-AHRC and Evidence Base between January and June 2021, looking at the role of academic libraries as research partners. The Professional Practice Fellowship Scheme was open to any colleagues within an academic library that belonged to an HEI institution, an independent research organisation, or an RLUK member. And it provides career development opportunities for colleagues to enable them to place their professional practice within a wider research context. The scheme was originally intended to have 5 fellowships. However, the number of fellowships was doubled to 10 during the assessment round, reflecting the quality of the applications and the recognition of the important role that the academic libraries can play as research partners and leaders. Research Libraries UK wants to take this opportunity as well to thank AHRC for their generosity in both supporting the scheme and increasing the allocation of the available fellowships. And we very much look forward to hearing about some of that work this morning. So the background scoping study asked a number of questions. Some of them around what position do academic and research libraries currently occupy, the role that they could play, what are some of the barriers, and how could they be overcome. The work was conducted through interview, survey, focus groups. Case studies were published in July 2021, and a number of recommendations began to be implemented from September 2021. The report made 13 far-reaching recommendations, both for individuals, for libraries, but also for their parent or institutions, and identified a number of areas of collective action, some recommendation for funders, and a number of these recommendations were across the 3 themes: supporting research capacity and skills development, engagement and advocacy, and institutional recognition for changing culture. And I hope that this morning and through this session, you will start to see the impact of particularly the fellowship scheme in these areas and these themes. Some of the key activities which we have been moving forward with AHRC are around the Professional Practice Fellowship Scheme, the Research Catalyst Programme, and the Technician Commitment. So again, this is really just to provide some context around how we were addressing some of the challenges which arose from this. RLUK became a named supporter of the Technician Scheme in 2022 in February. And it's again about raising the visibility of research libraries as homes of specialist and technical expertise. The Research Catalyst Programme began in April 2022. We have 18 colleagues from across the community going through that. And this is looking at supporting that creation of research funding, grant writing, building research proposals, and we're very excited that there will be a second cohort of this programme that we will announce later in the year. But in terms of the work, the session this morning, the focus for the Professional Practice Fellowship Scheme was around some of the challenge and the capacity for dedicated time to conduct research. It was collaboratively developed, and it's about supporting that research capacity and capability, and it's been very highly tailored to the fellows' research interests. We announced the first cohort in May 2022, and we currently have a second cohort who are in the mix that we will be able to announce later in the year. So really excited to see that develop. And here are our 10 initial fellowship scheme fellows, and we look forward to hearing from them this morning. Particularly, we have presentations from Alice, Amy, Amelie, and Alison. But without further ado, I am going to hand over to Joanna, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, William, and good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be sharing a podium with our wonderful fellows and with William. This scheme is really important to AHRC. It's part of our commitment to bringing breadth, visibility, and diversity to research careers. Through this fellowship scheme, we hope to recognise and celebrate the contribution of research libraries to research in the arts and humanities. We're also committed to making connections between people, sectors and capabilities. And we see this scheme as supporting knowledge exchange and collaborative work between research libraries and academic research, traditional academic researchers in universities and IROs. We hope it's also going to transform research infrastructure to enable the very best arts and humanities research. We take an ecosystem approach to research funding in common with most of UK research and innovation. And we hope to open up research assets, by which we mean collections of documents, of objects, of digital assets and data for study and engagement. And we're doing this with the fellowship scheme by empowering those who know those collections best to drive the research agenda. So for all those reasons, it's very important for us that we continue to support this important fellowship scheme. And I'm very much looking to hearing from the fellows about the research that they've been undertaking, which is going to help us towards these important objectives. William alluded to the second round of the fellowship scheme, which is currently undergoing assessment. And we're hoping we're going to be able to make some announcements about the outcomes of that assessment in the next month or two. The fellows are building up into a cohort. We've seen some information and knowledge sharing and sort of the connection building amongst the fellows throughout this first cohort, and that's wonderful to see. And I'm really hoping that this conference will enable them to recognise the linkages between their own research as a cohort and also with their sort of broader peers in research libraries and other parts of the sort of knowledge curatorial ecosystem. So I really hope you won't be shy in your questions in speaking up about your experience of research and how you see yourself fitting into that picture, whether that's as a leader in research programs or a participant in some other capacity. And I'll be here as part of this panel and hoping to answer questions from you about any element of the fellowship scheme as it currently stands, or any other part of AHRC's funding policy with regard to research libraries and research technical professionals. And with that, I will hand over to William, I think, to introduce the fellows for what, in my mind, the most interesting part of this event.
Thanks very much, Joanna. Absolutely. I'm really delighted to move into this showcase element of the session, and I'm delighted to introduce Alice Corble. So Alice is a teaching and learning supervisor at the University of Sussex, and Alice's fellowship explores the integral role of the library in the university's post-colonial historical development and in contemporary calls to decolonize the curriculum via new maps of learning. So I'm going to hand over to Alice, and we look forward to your presentation. Thanks so much.
So, hi everyone, it's good to be here alongside my fellow fellows to talk about my project at the University of Sussex Library, which, as William said, it aims to trace post-colonial maps of institutional memory for decolonial library learning. So I've called my presentation Recollecting Collections to signal the memory work that's involved in archival and library research, as well as collection development practices, and to signify something around whose memories, whose voices, or whose stories can be discovered or heard in this work. So this is has grown out of my involvement in the library's decolonisation working group, which was established around 2020 to 21. And we've published a statement of intent on this work, which is still in its very early stages. An excerpt from this, I'll just read out. The library's activities are rooted in systems of inequality built on the racist legacies of imperialism. Decolonization in the library seeks to address the inherent imbalances and power structures present in our work and collections. We recognize that these unequal power structures are embedded within wider institutional systems of whiteness and are committed to collaborating in a process of lasting change around this, in line with the University Race Equality Charter mission. And it goes on to say quite a bit more, and we're sort of thinking about this work and trying to develop it in 6 areas of practice: acquisitions, cataloguing, classification, teaching and pedagogy, display, interpretation and outreach, user experience, and all of this sort of grounded in collaborative approaches as well. My role at the library is on the teaching and pedagogy side, teaching library skills across all disciplines. We don't have subject librarians at Sussex. And in order to do that work and to inform the work of the group more broadly, I identified how much research is needed to understand our own institutional and academic history, which is what sparked the fellowship that I'm now doing. I also just want to note that, you know, like the majority of libraries in this country, we are a very white library service, and I am part of that as a white woman. And I acknowledge my own kind of structural privilege with that, and that I benefit from that. But I try very much to disrupt that and to apply a critical and intersectional approach to dismantling these systems and structures. So the title of my, or working title of my actual fellowship is Retracing the New Map of Learning. I'll come to that quote in a bit. Post-colonial library and archival legacies and decolonial struggles in higher education. And the overarching research question is, how important and integral is the university library as both a centre of learning and a repository of institutional memory to understanding contemporary calls to decolonise the university and its curricula? And in terms of the literature on this topic, there's a lot of growing literature, many of which are, you know, across the different social sciences and humanities disciplines, with a few highlights here of key books on the left. And there is sort of growing publications in the library and information science sort of disciplines and professional practice disciplines, which you can see on the right here. However, as readers of both of these, and with an academic background myself in sort of sociology and cultural studies, I don't see this sort of two fields maybe speaking to each other enough. So, you know, books on the left don't tend to mention libraries. Books on the right might cite some of the theories in the left, but the audiences are not speaking to each other really. And that's what I'm hoping to bridge with this work. And the methods that I'm using are quite mixed. It's a one-year project. I'm technically about halfway through, but I'm not halfway through my data gathering yet. So I've had a bit of time off for sick, and there's been industrial action, but I will get there. So I'm still in the archival phase of my research, which is looking at 3 different special collections at Sussex, which I'll come to, looking at their provenance as well as their usage, in addition to the content of them, with the intention of surfacing institutional legacies and hidden histories. And then I'm going to shortly move on to doing a range of interviews and workshops with current and former Sussex staff and students, with the staff that will be a mixture of faculty and library staff, to generate stories and counter stories of library legacies and usages. And then the aim is to sort of map these collections and narratives to trace the post or neo-colonial, racialized and transnational learning landscapes within. And I'm using a number of sort of theoretical concepts to sort of think through this, and they tend to be around tensions between reform and resistance, silence and noise, elite and or marginal or vanguard kind of positions, and the processes of learning and unlearning around these topics. And I'm inspired by Alexander and Mohanty's feminist work on cartographies of power and knowledge, as well as a range of other scholars on decolonial and archival praxis. So just onto the collections briefly. There's 3 main collections that I'm looking at within our special collections. the very large University of Sussex collection at our archival facility, the Keep, which is about a 15-minute walk from the campus. That's essentially the institutional record of the library and the whole university rather as well. And then the University of Sussex Legacy Collection, which is a collection of documents and ephemera based at the library in a basement facility. And another very large collection that we've recently acquired and catalogued, which is the British Library of Development Studies Legacy Collection. Confusingly, they've all got quite similar names. So just going a bit more into the institutional history itself, the campus was designed by Basil Spence, and he said in his early plans for it that the library should be sited centrally since its function as a storehouse of knowledge is common to all faculties. This important fact determined the position of the broad masses of arts and library on one side and sciences on the other. And then the first librarian of Sussex, Dennis Cox, said, "It is impossible to imagine a university without books. Upon them, its work largely depends." And then he cites the University Grants Committee from a document from 1921, which said, "The character and efficacy of a university may be gauged by its treatment of its central organ, the library." So again, this is what sort of sparked my interest in how we understand decolonization of universities through its central organ. Yet these organs are sometimes eclipsed in the literature on decolonization. So Sussex was founded, it's a powerful case study for this project because it was founded in 1961 as the first of Britain's so-called new universities, which emerged at a time of a significant local, national and global societal and geopolitical change. So this was a post-war, post-imperial, decolonial, or you could still say neo-colonial context. And within that, they envisaged a new map of learning to address this new moment. That phrase was dubbed by Asa Briggs, who was one of the early VCs and professor of history. And in subsequent decades, it sort of developed or in the 60s and 70s in particular, it developed a reputation for being quite a radical university. There's a picture of Asa Briggs there in the student union surrounded by anti-imperialist protesters. But it was also at the same time known as Balliol-on-Sea, named after one of the oldest Oxford colleges, because many of its lecturers were former Oxford dons, and I think the student body was largely quite upper middle class, even though they were attracted by this alternative scene. And the new map of learning, as it translated into the schools and the departments, well, there weren't departments. In fact, that was the biggest sort of change. They had schools of study that had multiple subjects within them, interdisciplinary subjects, and all degree programs had to have, in the early years, a 1-to-1 ratio of arts and sciences within them. So Briggs described this as a dialectical relationship, and the library had to navigate that in its development. At the same time, nationally, there was a lot going on in the field of race relations. I don't have time to sort of go through this in detail here, but you can see in this timeline there were a number of parliamentary acts around the Commonwealth and race relations. And at the same time, a school emerged, which was part of this kind of radical scene, the School of African and Asian Studies, or AHRC, and a partnership organisation at Sussex called IDS, Institute of Development Studies. And I've been looking in the archives at the Keep on the foundation of both AHRC and IDS, and finding some very interesting records that sort of show the post-colonial or neo-colonial kind of ideologies around that. I haven't got time to read these quotes out, but it sort of shows how much sort of library materials were needed in the absence of sort of the previous relationships with colonial officers, and they're needed to train up a new generation of administrators and professionals for the Commonwealth countries. So those I found in the University of Sussex collection at the Keep. That is a huge collection. I can't possibly look at it all. I'm focusing mainly on the library records because there are 689 boxes there that cover the 1950s to the present. And here are a few highlights from the student publications, particularly around AHRC, and which were sort of developing a very anti-colonial and liberatory approach to learning, activism, and research. Then I mentioned the British Library for Development Studies, or BLDS Legacy Collection, which is a huge collection that we've inherited from IDS, which used to have its own library, which was closed down, and it is now, the collection has now been catalogued and is housed in our basement and is fully discoverable. And the majority of the literature there is from the Global South, and many of the countries of origin don't even have access to these items themselves. So they were collected over a long period of time, 250,000 items from 150 countries in 56 languages from the mid to late 20th century, mainly sort of grey literature and pamphlets, but many of which also have, you know, you can read the whole thing as a sort of colonial or neo-colonial project. You can also read a lot of liberatory struggles within that, as this image on the left shows from one of the Tricontinental publications. Just a bit more about the collection there. I'm running over time, so I'm going to skip on. But there is some current exciting work going on too, which I'm not directly involved with, but it's a useful research tool for me to digitally map the catalogue items to where they are over time on an atlas. And it's going to be very interesting to compare that with the main collection, which is most likely to be very biased in the global north. I could come back to that in the discussion if there's time. And then the other legacy collection that I mentioned is known as just the Library Legacy Collection, and that is, again, mainly grey literature covering sort of early to mid 20th century to late 20th century, and I'm going through that and searching for a range of materials relating to colonialism and race that will have been used in teaching and research over the years, with some highlights here. And this is a collection that really sort of shows how Sussex developed and how the library developed over time. And this is a little excerpt from one of the early documents librarians, who said he wanted the collections to reflect the mood of the times, and you know, those being quite radical times, and there were all kinds of grassroots publications in there as well as official government ones. Moving on quickly, because I'm over time, I want to just quickly highlight one of my key discoveries so far is a very little known research centre that was established at Sussex and Barbados in the University of the West Indies between 64 and 74. And I've got a bit lost in the archives of this this centre, because many of them are not catalogued and were recently discovered because they were being discarded from one of the administrative offices. And in that collection, I've discovered that Sussex had one, the founder of that centre, Professor Fernando Henriquez, pictured here, was possibly the first Black dean in the history of British academia, who was previously at Leeds. And you know, he's not known about at Sussex, it seems, and you know, this is an example of one of the hidden histories that I'm talking about. And there's all kinds of reports in there that show the aims of the project, all kinds of ephemera relating to how it developed in Barbados as well as at Sussex, and the legacies and sort of connections it had for anti-racism work in the UK. And there are many Black alumni at Sussex who have also sort of been erased from the institutional record. That a current project at Sussex called Black at Sussex, which I'm also involved in, is looking to remedy and have some critical coverage and celebration of them. So I'm over time, and I'm just going to end on this image of past and present struggles. And finally, sort of a question for discussion when we get into that part is like, what do we as library practitioners and researchers need to learn to unlearn in order to decolonize and diversify our roles in collection development, knowledge production, and education? Thank you for listening, and sorry for going over time.
Thanks very much, Alice, and thanks for sharing some really fascinating discoveries and also sort of showcasing some of that material and the collections from Sussex. So we may come back to some of these during the panel session, but what we'll do now is we'll move to our next speaker, who is Amelie Roper. And Amelie is the head of research at Cambridge University Libraries, and her fellowship investigates what would needed to be done to implement a collaborative national programme to document the UK's scientific response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to pass over to Amelie and let you take it away. Thanks so much.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be with you all today and to have an opportunity to talk to you about my fellowship research, which is looking at how we as collecting organisations might go about documenting the role of UK science in the COVID-19 pandemic. My fellowship started in September 2022 and runs through until the end of July this year. So I'm going to be reporting on some of my interim findings today. I thought I'd begin with this quote from Jeremy Farrar's book, Spike, as this really sums up my motivation for choosing this topic. As we were living through the pandemic, I was very aware of the rapid response collecting initiatives that were taking place across UK libraries, archives and museums to document what we might call the socio-cultural record of COVID-19. This involved collecting personal testimonies, objects and ephemera from patients, frontline clinicians and the general public. There was a lot of activity. Some commentators have even described this as a frenzy of collecting activity. Our sector acted quickly and I think should be very proud of what it achieved. Working in a university during the pandemic, I was particularly struck by all the different kinds of scientific research into COVID-19 that were being undertaken and how quickly those involved mobilised in very challenging circumstances. The scale and the breadth of this activity is captured in Jeremy Farrar's words here. However, to date, there has been no large-scale coordinated attempt to document the UK's scientific record of COVID-19. This is particularly striking as UK science showed extraordinary impact through innovation and collaboration in the national and international response to the pandemic. So with this context in mind, my research question is to try to understand what would be needed to implement a national programme to collect, preserve and provide access to the UK's scientific response to COVID-19, and to establish whether there is both a need and an appetite in our sector to do this. Part of the purpose of this would be to create a balanced historical record of the pandemic. However, importantly, it would also ensure that we had data to inform future policy, practice and pandemic response. It would involve collecting materials not only relating to the science that made the headlines, but to other work that was going on quietly in the background, work that ruled out avenues for further investigation, small studies, and science whose methodologies and findings we might now challenge. My talk today will focus on the objectives of my research, how we might define the UK's scientific response to COVID-19, summarise the findings of a survey on COVID-19 collecting I've undertaken, and explore some emerging themes. I'm limited in what I can cover, and the project has several other aspects to it. So if you're interested to find out more, you might like to take a look at the project webpage. So my research has three objectives: defining and scoping the scientific response, understanding the infrastructure needed to support collecting, and barriers to implementing a collaborative collecting programme. I'm going to focus on the first objective today, defining and scoping the scientific record of COVID-19, by looking at themes in COVID-19 scientific research and collecting. My working definition of the UK's scientific response to COVID-19 is scientific endeavour in the fields of life sciences, physical sciences, applied sciences and formal sciences, involving all sections of the scientific workforce and support staff, and taking place in a range of settings, including universities, pharmaceutical companies, and scientific research institute. I don't think it's possible to come up with a perfect, all-encompassing definition, and I am refining this as my research progresses. But I think it's still really important to try to define this and to keep trying, as this imposes some much needed boundaries on a very complicated area of collecting. So to unpick this a little, defining COVID-19 science collecting has three elements: the branches of science in which research is taking place, who is involved in this research, from the lead scientist to all those other individuals playing important supporting roles, and the variety of settings in which the research is taking place. I think it's also really important to think about what might be excluded. I'm currently working on the basis that the scientific record of COVID-19 excludes healthcare delivery, the socio-cultural record, including individual patient experience, social psychology, health psychology, and public health policy. Again, these boundaries are really difficult to define, and I'm refining this as my research progresses. So what might this mean in practice? So in this slide, I've given some examples of UK contributions to COVID-19 scientific research within the broad disciplines of formal sciences, physical sciences, life sciences, and applied sciences. So these include research into testing, genome sequencing, therapeutic trials, environmental modelling, immunology, biostatistics, and engineering. I've also identified some cross-cutting themes that underpin these areas, such as science communication, human behaviour, equity, diversity and inclusion, and ethics. I'm now going to turn to the survey on COVID-19 collecting in UK libraries, archives and museums, which is an important strand of my research. The survey questions covered four broad areas of collecting: pre-pandemic scientific collecting, respondents' knowledge of current COVID-19 collecting in their organisation, respondents' knowledge of future COVID-19 collecting plans in their organisation, and some bigger picture questions that asked respondents to look beyond their own organisation and consider priorities for the future. Within each of these areas, I asked both about general COVID collecting and science collecting, formats of materials, thematic areas, and challenges. I also asked about respondents about their knowledge of COVID-19 research in their own organisation, if there was any. The purpose of this was partly to test and refine my working definition, but also to try to start to unpick the links between the scientific research process and collecting. So the survey was circulated in late February and closed in mid-March this year. And I wanted to say a huge thank you to the many organisations that responded. I was really, really pleased with this response rate and the range of different organisations that took the time to complete the survey. I think it's testament to the generosity of our sector and also the sector's engagement with this topic. So, hot off the press, here are some of the headline findings from the survey. So thinking to start with about current collecting and collecting that has already been undertaken, 58% of respondents had undertaken some form of COVID-19 collecting, so that could be science or it could be something else. The most popular areas were creative responses, personal testimony, and personal archives. Only 16 respondents, so that's 18%, said they had collected materials specifically relating to COVID-19 science. This was an important finding, as it supported my hunch that most of the collecting to date was related to the socio-cultural record. In terms of future collecting, just over half of respondents plan to collect materials relating to COVID-19 in the future. These could be scientific materials or materials in other fields. Just over half thought they would need additional funding specifically for COVID-19 science collecting. These findings were important because they give a sense of the collecting still to be done. And in fact, one person who's quite early in their career commented that they thought that COVID-19 was likely to be a feature of the rest of their working life. So it's a long game. These findings also support the need for targeted collecting relating to science. But what was also striking was the high levels of uncertainty in responses. 38% were unsure if they would collect further materials relating to COVID, and 27% were unsure if they would need further funding. I think this signals that it is still early days, and as I mentioned before, collecting can be a very long game. The survey results also confirmed an interest in collaborative collecting, in a collaborative collecting project relating to science, with 54% saying they were likely or very likely to take part. And bear in mind that there were also responses from some organisations that didn't undertake any COVID-19 collecting at all. And then looking at the bigger picture, so when I asked people to think beyond the sort of immediate confines of their own organisation, respondents were almost unanimous in thinking that COVID-19 science, the collecting of COVID-19 materials in the future was both very important and very urgent. However, alongside science collecting, they also identified personal testimony and personal papers as areas that were very important. There was also a strong consensus on the barriers to COVID-19 science collecting, with the most commonly cited being lack of staffing, closely followed by the inability to respond before material is lost, and lack of physical and digital infrastructure. And now to reflect on some of the emerging themes. In organisations where COVID-19 research was taking place, there seemed to be a disconnect between knowledge of COVID-19 scientific research trends and the collecting that was taking place. So, whilst respondents were aware that scientific research relating to COVID-19 was taking place in their organisation, they often had limited awareness of the broad areas of this research or whether it was continuing. This is in no way a criticism of the wonderful work of these professionals. It's really hard to have this kind of awareness as a collecting professional. But I think if we are to collect in a way that will provide a balanced record of UK COVID-19 science, we will need to find a way to address this. The importance of personal papers-led collecting is also emerging as a really strong theme. Both historically and currently as a sector, we have really valued the collection of archives relating to named scientists. And I'm sure this will continue to be an important part of COVID-19 science collecting. However, if we don't challenge the dominance of this approach, there's a danger that we won't capture COVID-19 science in all its breadth and complexity. Linked to this, another important theme is that COVID-19 collecting is taking place in lots of different areas of library operations. So from modern collecting acquisitions to teams within special collections to scholarly comms, individuals and research data managers. We need to see these areas as cooperating to collect COVID-19 science rather than working in silos. Another really important emerging theme, very predictable, is that COVID-19 science collecting is complicated. It involves lots of different formats in complexly networked institutions, and there are often challenges of GDPR, compliance, and funder regulations, for example. As individuals, we can't seek to be experts in all of these areas. We need to understand and capitalise on each other's strengths rather than expecting to be able to do everything ourselves. And finally, and most importantly, my research so far is definitely showing that there is both a need and an appetite for a collaborative national collecting project. And I'd just like to end with a quote from Professor Charlotte Summers, Professor of Intensive Care Medicine in Cambridge. Just as the records of the 1918 flu pandemic influence contemporary pandemic planning and response, let's ensure the UK's scientific record of COVID-19 is available to be used and reused by future generations for the benefit of society. This is important work. Let's make sure we continue to make progress on it together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amelie, and thank you for sharing that kind of that work and your thoughts, particularly today. I really wanted just to say thank you so much to you for that. And we have 2 more fellows. So we have our next presentation is from Alison Harvey, who is the archivist at Cardiff University, and Alison's fellowship has explored minimal computing and its potential to help libraries and researchers to realize and achieve their digital ambitions. So we have a pre-recorded session here from Alison, so we're going to take it away.
My fellowship is looking at ways in which libraries can help support digital outputs in the humanities, particularly within institutions that might lack a dedicated team or IT infrastructure to help with this. And I'm using the term digital archives very loosely here to refer to any kind of storytelling, analysis, curation, or collection of digital content, either by academics as part of their research or by students as part of their assessment. Minimal computing refers to computing that is carried out within any kind of hardware, software, or capacity constraint. And the inspiration for this project was that in my time at Cardiff, I have seen a lot of appetite among our academics to innovate by creating online exhibitions and digital collections to showcase their research. But they've typically been forced to rely on free third-party platforms like WordPress, Weebly, and Instagram to host their research outputs. And I've always been concerned about the sustainability of these platforms and whether we can rely on them to offer reliable long-term hosting or support. And I've also had conversations that have suggested that there's appetite to use digital tools for student teaching and assessment too, but people just aren't sure where to begin. And there's a good reason for this. Up until recently, Cardiff University has lacked any kind of digital repository that would have been capable of supporting these kinds of activities. But last year we invested in Armour Digital from Ex Libris, and this supports the curation and display of our digitized content. And so my fellowship is designed to address the next logical question. What capacity does Armour Digital have to support the construction of digital archives and online exhibitions? And I want to find out what our researchers' needs are and to find out what extent the repository can meet them. Asking what are its features and limitations and what other tools will it integrate with? And this kind of systematic testing, research and skill development would have been very difficult for me to undertake in conjunction with my substantive role. And the fellowship has made space for that work to take place. At a local level, I want to build research capacity by establishing what the library can offer or would need to offer in order to support researchers in publishing digital outputs to our new repository. But more broadly, I want to build capability across the sector more widely by publishing a digital toolkit. This will represent the results of my research, trials and reviews of free and simple tools that are suitable for getting started with the basics of digital storytelling, digital archives, and simple digital humanities projects in an accessible and jargon-free way. All of the tools that I'm reviewing are free to use, and they are based on minimal computing. So no web hosting, no servers, no databases. Anyone can use them without local IT support or infrastructure. And it frustrates me that a lot of these very simple platforms are accompanied by unnecessarily complicated documentation, in my view. And I'm attempting to use my skills as an information professional in order to bridge this communication gap, to help people who may not feel that they are technical to feel more confident to engage with these tools to support their teaching and research and creativity. The first thing that I did on the fellowship was to set up a blog using GitHub and this minimal computing method that I'd heard about. And I'm not anti-WordPress, but given the topic of my fellowship, I thought it was important to lead by example by demonstrating a way of making a free, simple website without any ads or branding that would be appropriate for a scholarly or pedagogical use. Now, this blog is made using a static site generator called Jekyll, and this is something that I'd heard a lot about, but had never previously had the time to explore. And it's really exciting in that it allows anyone to set up a website or blog for free and have complete freedom over the design. And I realize that it is currently looking a bit uninspiring. This is how it looks out of the box with the default template and configuration. But in theory, it is completely customizable. It's very simple. It's pure HTML, Markdown, and CSS. So it's a really great way to practice the basics of web development by playing around with the templates and learning in a very active and applied way. The blog is hosted for free via GitHub, and I said just now that I have concerns about the sustainability of third-party hosting, and I realize that this is essentially third-party hosting. But GitHub is used by every developer in the world. So if this goes down, we are going to have bigger problems than just a few digital exhibitions disappearing. It should be pretty bulletproof. And it also has the benefit of being designed for collaboration. Early on in my fellowship, I was having technical problems with Armour Digital related to IIIF, which is the framework that serves our images. Basically, the ability to share images outside our repository had been lost following a software update, and that had a critical impact on my fellowship, which relies on this functionality. And so I used this blog as a sandbox to demonstrate the behavior I was seeing and share the posts with people at Ex Libris and in the IIIF community. And they were able to read my posts, but also to examine the working code behind them to allow them to help me diagnose what was causing the problem. So in GitHub, any other user can fork or copy my code, and then they can make changes, test things out, share the edited version back with me without altering my original post. So it is a brilliant tool for collaborative troubleshooting. After making the blog, I built on my skills with Jekyll to set up another GitHub hosted site using something called Wax. Wax works with Jekyll to allow you to build free digital archives and exhibitions, again, without adverts or branding. And I think it looks really good. You can load images to it, which get displayed as a gallery alongside their metadata. And these can be filtered and searched. And even more exciting is that it can convert standard JPEGs into IIIF compatible images. And I don't have time today to go into the details of IIIF, but one of the things that it enables is this deep zooming into digital images. It looks really professional and it requires no servers or hosting whatsoever. The rest of the site can be customized for whatever you need. I've made a web page per exhibition theme, and I've embedded some interactive content that I made using other tools. So it doesn't matter too much that the page itself is simple Markdown, because you can make complex images elsewhere and embed them. And this was made using a free tool called Exhibit, which was developed by the University of St Andrews. And it's one of many free and simple tools that I'll be describing and writing documentation for now that I'm in the final months of the fellowship. And the toolkit will look something like this. I'm using Gitbook to compile and document how-to guides for a range of digital humanities tools in an accessible, jargon-free way. Gitbook is part of the GitHub family, and it should be a sustainable or at least an easily migratable hosting option. And as the conference theme is partnership, I wanted to end on the observation that the fellowship has led to some very unexpected connections. Last year, I was invited on a research trip to the University of Wyoming with my fellowship mentor, Professor Julia Thomas, who's pictured there on the bottom right. And Julia felt that my work dovetailed with her own AHRC-funded project on computer vision and book illustrations, and asked me to join her to meet project partners in Wyoming's special collections and their English department. And there we were able to exchange practices and ideas related to digital humanities training, online exhibitions, digitization workflows, and digital platforms, which was a fantastic experience. And there was one very unexpected outcome. While I was slightly lost on campus one day, I asked someone for directions, and this gentleman walked me to the building that I was looking for. And during the short conversation that we had on the way, it transpired that he was researching a Welsh composer whose archive is held at Cardiff University, and which I had actually catalogued. We ended up having coffee, and the outcome was that he made a successful bid to Leverhulme to visit Cardiff University, and we were reunited several months later in Wales. And I just love that story because the world is so much smaller than we think. And opportunities like this fellowship have the potential to have this completely unexpected ripple effect. So I would thoroughly recommend the scheme. And if anyone would like information or advice about applying, I am always happy to chat. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alison. That is fantastic, and some lovely kind of comments there about making those connections, and really some of that serendipity and unexpected and fantastic outcomes from the fellowship. Our last but not least, sort of final presentation is from Amy Campbell. Amy's the Research Services Advisor at Leeds Beckett University, and Amy's fellowship has explored how librarians can accelerate collaboration by being embedded in research teams, and she has also investigated best practice in research data management.
Hello, my name is Amy Campbell, and in this presentation I want to talk about my project to investigate the librarian's role in accelerating interdisciplinary collaboration. It is part of an AHRC-RLUK Professional Practice Fellowship. Leeds Beckett University is a large teaching-focused university with ambitious plans to increase its research output and quality. This project worked with the Interdisciplinary Centre for Implant Research, or IRIS, studying medical implants from a variety of research perspectives. It was a 6-month project which I ran for 2 days a week, alongside my normal role as Research Services Advisor. In the literature, it is argued that interdisciplinary teams need interpreters to enable researchers from different disciplines to understand each other's perspectives. What hasn't been explored yet is whether librarians could be those interpreters. I theorised that as librarians develop multidisciplinary expertise by supporting multiple subject areas concurrently, their skills and knowledge could enable researchers to translate terminologies across disciplines. Furthermore, this could accelerate collaboration between researchers and perhaps lead to faster research dissemination. My fellowship sought to test this theory. In this study, I used the term crosswalk. Commonly, a crosswalk depicts how one system or metadata scheme relates to another. For example, when implementing a new library system, the crosswalk specifies which metadata fields relate to each other, thus providing the required interpretation for systems to function smoothly. In my study, I'm using crosswalk as a framework for how I, as a librarian, may be interpreting different research terminologies, which I theorise will enable and perhaps even accelerate collaboration. This diagram demonstrates my methodology. This was a mixed method study. I ran 2 online focus groups with IRIS researchers, with a total of 8 participants. The focus group transcript data was analysed using semantic analysis, and I identified keywords to create 2 iterative crosswalks, which I then used to conduct literature searches. Focus groups members were presented with relevant resources, and I theorised that this would accelerate collaboration through faster understanding of each other's disciplines. I then created an online evaluation questionnaire so that they could judge whether there was value in the activity for accelerating collaboration. This is an extract of the first iteration of my crosswalk. As I analysed transcripts, I chronologically added keywords and then started grouping them under themes. In the second iteration of my crosswalk, I focused on the most prevalent themes. As I started conducting literature reviews and learnt more about the subject areas, I was able to develop my search by adding additional keywords. And hopefully this demonstrates how a librarian can use their multidisciplinary expertise to benefit a research team. This is the process mapped out for one topic. The topic of posthumanism was discussed in both focus groups, but from different perspectives. And this crosswalk sought to unpack the debates and bring in the wider themes from the focus groups. As my literature search developed, I added additional keywords to develop the search string. The resource I provided, which you can see at the bottom, is a chapter from an ebook, and it discusses posthumanism from a feminist perspective and discusses changing attitudes over time, which were themes which were picked up in many of the focus group discussions. To find this chapter, I first found an article, and in the reference list it mentioned an anthology about this chapter. So I tracked down the anthology, which luckily we had in our ebook collection. So again, hopefully this demonstrates the value of having a librarian to track down obscure resources. A total of 12 resources were provided to cover most of the focus group discussions. I searched databases which were potentially unfamiliar to the researchers to demonstrate the value of having a librarian in the research team, and tried to provide a broad range of resource types. The 19th century illustration shown in the top right-hand corner was provided because of focus group discussions about gendered power imbalances, where mostly male surgeons are operating on mostly female bodies in terms of medical implants, and also because of discussions about wanting to bring disciplines such as art into the IRIS Research Centre. The illustration depicting suited male surgeons operating on a passive yet seemingly awake female body neatly encapsulated that discussion for me. I will now detail the evaluation questionnaire I created and provide some of my results. I created an anonymous online questionnaire and sent the link to my 8 focus group participants. I decided to make it anonymous to ensure participants gave frank and honest responses. The questionnaire aimed to test whether my intervention enabled collaboration to happen between the researchers, and if so, how. It also evaluated more broadly the role of librarians within research teams to inform future activities or research. Only 5 out of the 8 participants responded to my questionnaire, which was disappointing, but pointed to the challenge of gaining and sustaining researcher engagement. Participants were asked whether they had read all of the resources provided, some of them, or none of them. No one said they had read all of them. 3 participants read some of the resources and 2 had read none. Participants were also asked how relevant they felt the resources were to the focus group discussions they had had. Interestingly, those who hadn't read any of the resources felt that they were less relevant than those who had read some of the resources. This finding could be read in 2 ways. Either they saw the titles of the resources and decided they weren't relevant enough to read further, or because they didn't engage with the resources they perceived irrelevance without really knowing. Similarly, when participants read the resources, they reported that their understanding of other researchers' disciplines increased. This suggests that if a librarian can sustain engagement with the researchers, then the librarian's professional practice is of value. The evaluation provides evidence that the focus group enabled collaboration in a variety of ways. For example, the focus groups provided an opportunity for researchers to share knowledge, learn about the benefits of contributing to IRIS, and building trust with each other. The results may also suggest that librarians create space for collaboration. By being a neutral convener and facilitator who asks pertinent questions, I hopefully enabled valuable conversations to happen and collaboration to begin. Participants were asked what research roles a librarian could hold within IRIS. The most popular responses were related to literature searching and data. However, all options were chosen at least once, suggesting librarians are valuable for a variety of roles. I particularly appreciated this qualitative response regarding roles for librarians within IRIS, which stated, "I think librarians should be formal members of research project teams and co-authors. I found retrieval of non-journal material interesting and potentially useful for my research." In summary, librarians can galvanise collaboration by bringing a research team together and asking pertinent questions which enable researchers to share knowledge and build trust. Librarians are recognised as valuable research partners. And sustaining research engagement is challenging, but doing so can enable interdisciplinary research teams to understand each other's disciplines and potentially collaborate faster. Now that the project is finished, I hope to write and publish a journal article about it. I am continuing to support IRIS within my normal role as Research Services Advisor. I'm also keen to explore further funding opportunities. Thank you for listening. If you would like to contact me about the project, please email me at this address.
Thanks so much, Amy, and thanks so much all of our fellows for those contributions. I'd like to take the opportunity now to invite our other fellows to join us on the panel and to open up to some questions or comments from the attendees. So we've got a number of colleagues joining us. Jonathan Bush from Durham. And as colleagues join, I will just ask them to introduce, if you could put on your camera for a second, Jonathan, introduce yourself and your project, then that will help kind of lead us into the open panel session. And welcome. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, my name's Jonathan Bush. I'm University Archivist at Durham University. My project is looking into the archives of religious orders and their future storage and access issues. As part of that, I did a survey which was sent out to 200 religious orders in the UK. I got a pretty good response rate of 41%, and I guess one of the key takeaways from my own research is not to assume that before you send a survey out, you're going to get a particular response. I was very surprised with the responses that I got. So I'm looking forward to sharing that my results further in the near future.
And fantastic. Thanks so much, Jonathan. And yeah, I think it's been really great to see sort of, as I've been talking with all of you in sort of one-to-ones, yeah, some of those kind of unexpected kind of outcomes that have kind of emerged, or some of and some of the barriers that have been sort of broken down. Let's have a look. So just looking for some more queries and comments. While we do that. A question for, if we can sort of kind of look back, kind of Alice, what do we need, thinking about the previous session as well, in your session, what do we need to unlearn or learn to unlearn in order to decolonize and diversify our role in some of these areas?
Do you want me to answer my own question? It's a difficult one. I don't expect anyone to be able to really answer that on the spot. But unlearning, I sort of pick that as it's actually quite an important concept in decolonial theory, particularly around education. And I think it's an important one to apply to sort of librarianship and archival practice as well, because I'm not a qualified librarian. I've worked in libraries for about 12 years and a number of professional roles, but one of the reasons I decided to do a PhD on the sociology of libraries instead of the professional qualification is because it didn't really ask the questions and take the critical approaches that I am interested in what libraries are and what they do. I think courses are slowly starting to change and address some of these things, but I think they're still embedded in principles of neutrality that don't address the hidden power dynamics and structures in collections and all the other kind of cultural baggage around universities. So that's what I was kind of getting at with that prompt around unlearning. And I think that can mean very different things to different professionals and can be quite unsettling, but that is the point of decolonization. So I don't know if that can prompt any thoughts from people.
No, that's really valuable. And we've got a couple of other fellows who are going to join. So Sarah's going to join. But in the meantime, Alison, we've also had, so there's a lot of interest about your toolkit. And I wonder if you wanted to say anything as well about your kind of some of your IIIF work. Well, Sarah joins, and then we can introduce her.
I've been working with the IIIF community for a few years now, and this fellowship has just provided some time and some space to work with it in a more active and engaged way. I've been hearing a lot about what other people do in their institutions. I've seen it used, and implemented by large institutions usually, and generally smaller institutions find it difficult to get a way in. It's considered that you need a lot of infrastructure, a lot of backing behind you. You need servers, you need an IT department to run it all. But I did just come across just a number of things during the pandemic years, actually, when I was working with IIIF community and working with smaller organizations who were talking about what things that they were doing more or less on a shoestring, using some free tools. I mean, what St Andrews have developed, Exhibit, if you Google exhibit.so, you can have a look at their tool that was developed to use with IIIF resources. What interests me about IIIF is that you can use other people's digitized collections. So you can use these tools, which are free, with collections that have been made available by large major institutions around the world. So it doesn't really matter what your collection, what your institution is doing digitally, because you can kind of lean on the collections of other people's. And this is something we did during the pandemic to deliver our teaching and all the other responsibilities and commitments that we had during that time that we were struggling to do in a remote way. So that's what really kind of got me fired up about the world of IIIF, really. And it was a shame that on the screen sharing the file was a little bit lower in quality, I think, than I'd anticipated. So you didn't really sort of see the really impressive kind of zooming you can do with it. But so I popped a link in the chat so you can kind of see it for yourself live. But it is really impressive, and so it is functionality that you can get access to even if you don't have IIIF collections in your own institution. So that's kind of what I'm attempting to communicate through the toolkit, is how you can get started, even just a small way, tapping into this wealth of digitized collections that have been made available by the world's greatest cultural institutions.
Fantastic, thank you very much. We have a question for Amelie, but we'll come to that in a second. I just wanted to invite Sarah, and then Hope to introduce yourselves and your projects to colleagues.
Thanks, William. Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Sarah. I am an archivist at the University of Hull. And the name of my project is Disrupting Provenance to Bring Hidden Histories to Light, which is looking at how we might rethink archival provenance to try and bring under-researched histories to the foreground. And I'm particularly concentrating on one collection that we hold here that relates to enslaved people. And listening to what Alice has just been saying about unlearning, I think my project also has a lot of kind of links with that, because what I'm really talking about is sort of trying to rethink and unlearn this very foundational idea of provenance within archival collections, and to think, well, actually, if we look at that differently, what kind of perspectives, what kind of things can we bring? So yeah, I think Alice and I are kind of coming at things from quite a similar perspective there.
Oh, fantastic, and some real, yeah, definitely some synergies there. And Hope, do you want to...
Hello, I'm Hope Williard. I'm an academic subject librarian at the University of Lincoln. My project, The Lifelong Researcher, supporting doctoral students' development of digital literacies, has explored how PhD students in history learn to find and use digital tools and resources for their work. In common with many of my wonderful colleagues, one of my key findings has been about the role as librarians as translators between groups of people who use different terminologies and have different levels of expertise around the use of the digital in research. I would also say that one of the key takeaways and wonderful joys of doing my project has been this community of fellows and the support we've had from RLUK. So it's very exciting to hear about everyone's projects and hear your questions.
Thanks so much, Hope. That's fantastic. And we have a couple of other questions. Amelie, I was going to come back to you. There's a question from the audience around what the greater adoption of open science practice might have on the future of collecting projects. So possibly extrapolating from some of your experiences with the COVID-19 material.
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question. And I think as open research practices become more widely adopted, of course, they're quite prevalent in science already, that will really help with collecting the scientific record of COVID-19. And that's sort of what I was getting at the end when I talked about different areas of the library working together. So COVID-19 collecting not just being about special collections, but about repository services and that kind of thing. I think it will really help with the kind of the end point of the research and the underlying data. But what it won't necessarily capture is maybe all the different individuals and their roles in the scientific process, and the kind of process of conducting the science. And so I think it gets us part of the way, but not all of the way. I suppose I also I think going back to the Jeremy Farrow quote that I started with, thinking about this breadth and collecting both the science that makes the big headlines that is purported to make the big difference, but thinking about the things that maybe don't make the paper and therefore aren't collected under the auspices of open sciences, and how we can capture them. So yeah, that's it gets part of the way, but not all of the way, I think.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And another question back to sort of Alison, and I guess you sort of touched on this, that is a question from the audience asking, do you think it is essential for archivists to have hands-on experience of using digital software platforms to be able to support teaching and research effectively?
I wouldn't say it's essential. It's a tool in your toolkit then, and you want to develop those skills. I think there should be a way of training up in those areas. And as I said, a lot of the tools that I've encountered, they aren't that difficult to use, but some of the language that surrounds them is so off-putting and so complex. Exactly as Hope was saying, you know, I think our role as information professionals is to kind of translate between those kind of two languages that people are speaking. We know how to speak to academics, might know how to talk to developers, but then how do we get everybody talking to one another? I think it depends on your setup in your organization as well, because it's this particular requirement around just locally. It's something that I noticed at Cardiff, that we have academics who would like to produce digital archives and digital exhibitions. This is a really good output if you are a humanities academic and you want to demonstrate outreach and engagement and public outputs. That's a really sort of quick win to do that. But who do you approach to do that? Do you go to IT? At Cardiff, that probably not. They look after the servers and the big infrastructure architecture of information technology at the institution. They're not going to be helping one-to-one academics with a digital project. So then, do you outsource to a developer? Do you factor that into your project funding, that kind of thing? It's very difficult. And so that is why people end up using sort of free to use, very proprietary third-party platforms that then sort of present issues when it comes down the line to, is your project going to be accessible in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, if you want to refer to it for ref or something like that. So we need to think about those requirements. So my aim is to look at what could we offer as from within the library to be a more sustainable approach. So that's a local problem to Cardiff, or a local issue to Cardiff, and I imagine it might be representative of issues that exist elsewhere. So that's why the aim is sort of developing the toolkit, is to offer something that might be useful beyond just my own institution.
Well, I think you may have a captive audience for that on the band, and some on the back of today's session, and sort of hope
will be coming very soon.
We're very happy to promote and support that. So Rosita has joined us as well from the British Library. Rosita, hi. Do you want to?
Hello. Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting me to join, and really impressed by the presentations and all my co-fellows projects. So my role is as a digital curator in the digital research team at the British Library. I've worked there for 18 years, and the fellowship has really given me a chance to kind of reflect on the experience I've had, the skills I've got, and the skills I still need to develop. My project investigates curatorial voices and cataloguing practice in the descriptions of the incunabula collections at the British Library. These are books printed before 1500 in our collection, and I'm working with a catalogue that was produced over 100 years, and approaching the catalogue as data, working with different tools to extract text from the images and to perform analysis with the text data to gain new insights into and new interpretations of this resource, but most importantly to think about using it to improve discoverability, usability of the collections. And so I'm really excited about the unknown uses of this data. Collections as data is a very big topic at the library, re-examining the quality of our metadata, enrichment of metadata, but also new ways, entry points into the collections. And so catalogs as data is a kind of an emerging topic, and I'm really interested in sharing my learning and reflections on what worked well, what didn't work well with the wider community. And so one key takeaway for me is digital research is messy. It's okay to fail, it's okay to have imperfect results, but it is kind of reflecting on the process and thinking about how the outputs could be shared in new ways, and others taking on from where I leave it in a way. So it's kind of, in a way, an open-ended research, but I hope to have some really concrete outputs by the end of my project at the end of July. And of course, just like Hope, it's been incredible to make the connections with others in this cohort, and particularly AAIF and other interests that we share, and continue to collaborate in the future with each other. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rosita. And I think actually just, again, sort of mentioning AAIF there, one of the things I think is really exciting for us at RLUK is sort of collectively seeing the impact, the engagement, all the work that you're doing, but also potentially some of that collaboration between yourselves, where we can work with other bodies, sort of like AAIF. One of our colleagues in the audience, Claire Knowles, has commented that some of those issues, Alison, that you've already identified, has very much kind of been identified by the AAIF community. RLUK is looking at opportunities to where we can collaborate and do some other work with AAIF. And just the range of themes and content, both for your professional practice and the collections, I think is really, really exciting. And I think hopefully today has given colleagues a little bit of a taster, as well as kind of Joanna as well, around just the breadth of some of that work. And I think there is some work to be done that we'll be doing, both evaluating the programme, but also further showcasing and synthesizing your work. So I really just wanted to ask as well, Joanna, if there's anything else you wanted to sort of add in, or any comments or reflections from AHRC?
It's a second that it's been so interesting listening to these research presentations and to see some of the linkages appearing amongst them. I have nothing further to add. I really look forward to seeing the outputs and outcomes in due course. And so thank you all for speaking about your research.
So, absolutely. So I would echo that. I would just like to say thank you all, both to Amy, Amelie, Alison, for those in-depth presentations, and for other colleagues joining us this morning to be on the panel. That is fantastic. I will tweet out some more details of the fellows and so on with the RLUK hashtag. There's some final comments in the chat around intersections between AAIF and library carpentry, which again we can pick up. I'd also just take this opportunity to thank kind of Joanna and AHRC again for all the support around this programme. I think it's really been quite exciting and, dare I say, actually groundbreaking. I think it feels really, really kind of positive and puts us in a really exciting place going forward.